The Bennett mansion sat on a quiet street, lined with trimmed hedges and glowing streetlights. Every morning, the house came alive with the hum of activity: cooks preparing breakfast, cleaners dusting the furniture, and the nanny, Grace, bustling through the hallway with a gentle energy that made even the youngest member of the household feel loved. Grace had been working for billionaire Caleb Bennett for just over a year. She was known for her calm voice, tidy work, and unwavering patience with Caleb's 8-year-old son, Jack. Though she lived in the staff quarters behind the mansion, she was up before dawn each day, ensuring Jack's school uniform was neatly pressed, his lunch packed, and his shoes polished until they gleamed. To most people, she was simply the nanny. But behind her gentle smile was a young woman with dreams far greater than anyone around her imagined. Caleb Bennett was a man who valued results over excuses. A self-made billionaire, he had risen from near poverty to wealth through real estate investments and sheer determination. His business empire was known for its precision and perfection, and he ran his household with the same principles. Caleb believed education was the foundation of success. He read books on leadership, funded scholarships for underprivileged children, and encouraged his son to excel. Yet, strangely enough, he had never thought about the education of the people who worked for him. To him, domestic staff were just workers doing their jobs. Grace, though polite and capable, was invisible in that sense, dependable, but ordinary in his eyes. That perception began to change one quiet afternoon. It was a Wednesday evening. Caleb had come home late from a meeting, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, his mind still busy with numbers and contracts. Jack was sitting at the dining table, surrounded by books, a deep frown on his small face. "Dad," he said, looking frustrated, "I can't do this math. It's too hard." Caleb sighed. "Let me see." But when he glanced at the page filled with fractions, decimals, and geometry drawings, he realized he hadn't solved equations like that in years. His phone buzzed with another business call, and he rubbed his temples. "Son, we'll figure it out later. Maybe your teacher can explain tomorrow." Just then, Grace entered quietly, carrying a tray of fruit. Seeing Jack's downcast face, she set it down and crouched beside him. "What's wrong, Jack?" she asked softly. "It's my assignment," Jack muttered. "Dad doesn't know it either." Grace smiled gently. "May I see?" Caleb, distracted by his phone, nodded absently and walked to the living room to take the call. Minutes later, he returned only to pause by the door in astonishment. Grace had taken a piece of paper and was sketching shapes, explaining something in simple, clear language. "Imagine this circle is a pizza," she said. "If you share it with 4 friends, how many slices does each person get?" Jack's face lit up. "Oh, so that's what fractions mean." Grace nodded, her eyes kind but focused. "Exactly. It's not hard when you picture it." Caleb stood there quietly, watching. Her voice carried confidence. Not the hesitant tone of someone unsure of herself, but the calm authority of someone who understood. The equations that had baffled him a few minutes earlier rolled effortlessly off her tongue. When Jack solved a problem correctly, Grace clapped softly. "Good job, you're getting it." Caleb felt something shift inside him, surprise, then guilt. All this time he'd assumed she was just an uneducated young woman earning a living. Yet here she was, teaching his son better than some professional tutors could. The next few days, Caleb couldn't help but notice a change in Jack. His grades improved, his confidence soared, and he was suddenly excited about learning again. And every time Caleb passed by the study room, there was Grace, patient, encouraging, and focused. Finally, one evening after dinner, he decided to speak to her. "Grace," he said, gesturing for her to sit, "I've noticed you've been helping Jack a lot lately. You seem to know these subjects very well." She smiled modestly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Thank you, sir. I just try to help where I can." Caleb tilted his head. "Did you ever go to college?" Grace shook her head slightly. "No, sir. I finished secondary school, but I couldn't afford to go further. My parents died when I was younger, so I had to start working to take care of my younger siblings." There was a pause, not of pity, but of admiration. Her voice didn't carry bitterness, only quiet strength. "You seem to have a good grasp of academics," Caleb said. "You explain things so clearly. Have you ever thought about continuing your education?" Grace gave a small, wistful laugh. Every day, sir, but life doesn't always give us what we wish for. I'm just grateful to have work that helps me support my family. Her humility struck him deeply. For a man used to power and privilege, it was rare to meet someone so intelligent, yet so grounded. That night, Caleb sat in his study long after everyone had gone to bed, her words replaying in his mind. Life doesn't always give us what we wish for. He realized that sometimes people didn't lack potential, they simply lacked opportunity. And maybe, just maybe, he could change that for her. The morning after Caleb's late-night reflection, the house felt unusually still. The city beyond the mansion walls hummed with life, but inside the air carried quiet tension, the kind that comes before a decision that changes everything. Caleb sat in his office, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, scrolling through his emails. But his thoughts weren't on business. They kept drifting back to Grace, the young woman who had surprised him with her intelligence and composure. He had built his empire by recognizing potential in people others overlooked. Yet somehow he had failed to notice the quiet brilliance working under his own roof. How many people like her have I ignored? He wondered. When Grace passed by his office door that morning, carrying a basket of freshly laundered clothes, he called out, "Grace, could you come in for a moment?" She stopped, startled. "Yes, sir." Caleb gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." Grace hesitated, unsure if she was in trouble. "Is something wrong, sir?" "No," Caleb said, offering a small smile. "Actually, I wanted to ask you a few things." He leaned back in his chair. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about not being able to afford university. You clearly have a strong mind and a gift for teaching. Have you ever considered studying education formally?" Grace looked down, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her apron. "I've thought about it, sir, many times. But thinking about it and being able to do it are very different things. I barely make enough to send money home for my siblings' school fees." Caleb nodded slowly. He'd expected that answer, but hearing it still stirred something in him. "What if," he said carefully, "you didn't have to worry about the cost?" Her eyes lifted, wide with disbelief. "Sir, I'm saying," he continued, "if you truly want to go to school, I'll sponsor you. Full tuition, books, everything. You've more than earned it." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Grace stared at him, speechless, her eyes filling with tears. She tried to blink away. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she stammered. "You've already done so much by employing me. I can't possibly accept something like that." Caleb shook his head gently. "You're not accepting charity, Grace. You're accepting opportunity. You've helped my son more than you realize. His teachers say his grades have improved remarkably. You have a natural gift, and I believe that talent deserves to grow." Grace's throat tightened. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Caleb said with a warm smile, "by being exactly who you are." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she quickly wiped them with the back of her hand. "Thank you, sir. Thank you for believing in me." That evening, the household buzzed quietly with the news. Caleb had made a few phone calls to friends who sat on university boards, and within days, Grace had an admission offer from a well-respected institution. When the letter arrived, sealed in an official envelope, she clutched it to her chest as though it were made of gold. Jack, who had been eavesdropping excitedly, ran to hug her. "You're going to school, Miss Grace. Does that mean you'll be a teacher like the ones at my school?" Grace laughed through tears. "Maybe even better," she said softly, "if I work hard enough." Caleb, standing nearby, couldn't help but smile. Watching the joy on her face reminded him of something he'd nearly forgotten. The thrill of a dream coming true. The following week, Grace began preparing for her new chapter. Between classes, she still worked part-time at the Bennett home, ensuring Jack's routines remained steady. Balancing both was difficult. She often stayed up late studying after her duties were done, but her determination never wavered. Caleb found himself quietly admiring her perseverance. On nights when he passed the study and saw her bent over her books, he felt an unfamiliar sense of pride. Not as an employer, but as someone who had witnessed a spark and helped it catch fire. He realized something profound. Education wasn't just about knowledge, it was about unlocking potential that the world too easily overlooked. Grace's journey was only beginning, But even then, Caleb sensed that what she was building would outlast any of his investments. The first day of university was unlike anything Grace had ever experienced. The campus was alive with laughter and chatter, the scent of freshly cut grass mixing with the crisp air of early morning. Students hurried past in colorful outfits, their backpacks slung casually over their shoulders, their faces bright with hope and confidence. Grace stood at the main gate, clutching her admission letter tightly against her chest. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from disbelief. She had dreamed of this moment for years, and now it was finally real. She whispered to herself, "This is it, Grace. This is your second chance." Her classes began that morning. Introduction to Educational Psychology and Philosophy of Education. She sat quietly in the back row, absorbing every word, her pen flying across her notebook. The lecturer's voice was calm and wise, but to Grace each word felt like gold. It wasn't easy, though. Most of her classmates were younger, carefree students who came from comfortable families. Some of them threw curious glances her way. The older woman who wore simple clothes and always sat in front with determined eyes. A few whispered, some smiled politely, but Grace didn't mind. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to learn. After classes, she would rush back to the Bennett home to pick Jack up from school, help him with his homework, and prepare dinner. Then, late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, she would sit at her small desk in the staff quarters, reading under the dim glow of a lamp. The days were long and exhausting, but she never complained. Caleb noticed the change in her, the tired eyes, the stack of books always in her arms, yet she still carried herself with quiet dignity. One evening, as he entered the study, he found her asleep over her open textbook, pen still in hand. He smiled, gently placed a blanket over her shoulders and whispered, "Keep going, Grace. You're doing something extraordinary." Months passed and Grace began to thrive. Her professors admired her discipline, and her classmates started turning to her for help. She formed study groups, tutoring others just as she had once tutored Jack. Word spread across campus about the nanny student who worked by day and studied by night. A story that inspired both sympathy and admiration. Some of her lecturers even began using her as an example of perseverance during their lessons. But despite her growing success, Grace never forgot where she came from. Every weekend, she sent money home to support her siblings and sometimes shared with other struggling students on campus. One rainy evening, Caleb invited her to join him and Jack for dinner. The family dining room glowed warmly under the chandelier, the sound of rain tapping gently against the windows. "So," Caleb said between bites, "how's school treating you?" Grace smiled. "It's challenging, sir, but I love it. Every day I learn something new. I've started working on a small project, teaching strategies for children who struggle with learning disabilities." Caleb's eyebrows lifted in genuine interest. "That's impressive. You're already thinking like an educator." Grace blushed slightly. "I just want to make a difference, sir. The way you gave me this chance, I want to help others find theirs too." Jack grinned. "When you become a teacher, Miss Grace, can you teach at my school?" Grace laughed. "Maybe one day, Jack. Who knows?" Caleb smiled, watching the two of them. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt such pride, not just in Jack's growth, but in Grace's transformation. By the end of her first year, Grace had earned top grades in nearly all her courses. Her name appeared on the dean's list, and she was invited to speak at a student motivation seminar. Standing on the stage in front of hundreds of students, she took a deep breath before speaking. "I came here believing I didn't belong," she began softly. "I was a nanny who thought education was a dream meant for others. But today I stand here to tell you that dreams don't belong to a class or a background. They belong to the determined." The hall erupted in applause. Caleb, who had slipped quietly into the audience without her knowing, felt a lump rise in his throat. Grace had come so far, and yet he knew this was only the beginning. Grace's second year at the university began with a mix of excitement and challenge. Her confidence had grown, but so had her responsibilities. Balancing her studies, her work with the Bennetts, and her duties to her family back home began to take its toll. There were mornings when she barely had time to eat breakfast before rushing out for lectures. Afternoons when she hurried back to help Jack with his assignments, and long nights when she studied until her eyelids grew heavy. Still, she refused to give up. But life, as always, had a way of testing determination. Midway through the semester, Grace's younger brother fell ill back home in the village. The medical bills drained most of her savings, leaving her with barely enough money to buy textbooks. One afternoon, she sat under a tree on campus, staring blankly at a list of required materials for her next class. She sighed deeply. "God, please give me strength," she whispered. Her phone buzzed, a message from Caleb. "Grace, Jack has a science project due tomorrow. He says he wants you to help him with it. Will you be home this evening?" She smiled despite her exhaustion. Even when everything feels heavy, she thought, Jack still makes me feel needed. That evening she returned to the mansion. Jack ran up to her, holding a pile of cardboard and glue. "Miss Grace, we're building a model of the solar system," he announced excitedly. Grace laughed and knelt beside him. "Then we'd better make it the best one in class." For the next 2 hours, they cut, glued, and painted. As the planets took shape, so did Grace's spirit. Watching Jack's eyes light up reminded her why she had started this journey, not just for herself, but to inspire others to believe in what they could become. Caleb watched them from the doorway, silently admiring her strength. Even after a full day of classes and chores, she was still patient, still smiling. But not everyone saw Grace's rise with admiration. Some of the household staff whispered behind her back. "She's getting too proud," one maid said one afternoon. "Just because the boss is paying her school fees, she thinks she's better than us." Grace overheard the comments as she walked by, her heart sinking. She never meant to make anyone feel small. That night, she sat alone in her room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Am I really changing, she wondered. Or do they just see what they want to see? Her doubts grew when she started receiving attention at school. Professors praised her work, and classmates sought her out for study sessions. It was flattering, but also isolating. She missed the simplicity of her old life, when her only task was caring for Jack. One evening she decided to speak with Caleb. "Sir," she began quietly, "I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done. But sometimes I feel like I'm not balancing things well. Maybe I'm not fit for this path." Caleb set his pen down and looked at her seriously. "Grace, every person who grows faces moments like this. You're not failing. You're stretching. That discomfort you feel means you're moving forward." His words settled in her heart like a balm. Determined to press on, Grace poured her energy into her studies. She began volunteering at a local community school on weekends, teaching children from poor backgrounds. Many of them reminded her of herself, curious, eager, and full of untapped potential. One day, after a class, a little girl tugged on her sleeve. "Miss Grace, I want to be like you when I grow up," she said shyly. Grace knelt down, smiling through misty eyes. "Then promise me one thing," she said softly. "Never stop believing that you can." Her passion didn't go unnoticed. The university awarded her a scholarship for excellence in education, covering her remaining years of study. When she brought the letter to Caleb, he grinned proudly. "You've made me proud. Grace, you've earned every bit of this," he said. "I couldn't have done it without you, sir," she replied sincerely. "You did it," he corrected gently. "I only gave you a door. You walked through it." As her final year approached, Grace was no longer just the quiet nanny. She had grown into a confident, articulate woman, respected by her professors, admired by her classmates, and loved by the Bennett family. Jack often bragged to his friends, "My nanny is going to be a real teacher soon." Caleb, meanwhile, found himself reflecting on how much she had changed, not just herself, but his household. There was more laughter, more warmth, and an unspoken reminder that kindness could spark greatness in others. On her last night before graduation, Grace stood by the window of her small room, gazing at the stars. She remembered the nights she had cried in silence, the times she had nearly given up, and the strength she'd found in faith and perseverance. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "a new chapter begins." The morning sun shone brightly over the university campus, glinting off the golden tassels of graduation caps. Families and friends filled the courtyard, laughter and applause echoing through the air. Grace stood among the sea of graduates, her heart pounding with emotion. The crisp black gown hung perfectly on her shoulders, and the cap perched carefully on her braided hair. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her degree certificate, a symbol of every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment of faith. "Congratulations, Miss Ease," her department head said warmly, shaking her hand. "You've made us all proud. You've proven that dedication has no age, no background." Grace smiled, her eyes shining. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best to make a difference." As she walked down the stage, the crowd clapped loudly. And then, above the noise, she heard a familiar voice. "There she is." Grace looked up. Caleb stood near the front row with Jack, both beaming with pride. Jack waved excitedly, holding a bouquet of flowers almost as big as himself. Caleb gave her a nod of approval, not as an employer, but as someone who had watched her bloom. In that moment, Grace couldn't hold back her tears. Later that evening, the Bennetts hosted a small dinner in her honor. The long dining table was decorated with fresh lilies, candles, and a simple banner that read, "Congratulations. Grace, you did it." Jack ran to her side the moment she walked in. "Miss Grace, you're officially a graduate now. Does that mean you're a real teacher?" Grace laughed softly, hugging him. "Yes, Jack, I suppose it does." Caleb stepped forward, extending his hand. "Grace, I don't have enough words to express how proud I am of you. When I hired you, I thought I was just getting a nanny for my son. I didn't realize I was bringing someone extraordinary into our lives." Grace's voice trembled. "Sir, you gave me a chance when no one else did. I'll never forget that." Caleb smiled warmly. "You earned everything you've achieved. I only opened the door. You chose to walk through it." They clinked glasses in a quiet toast. "To new beginnings," Caleb said. "To second chances," Grace replied with a smile. A few months later, Grace began her new job as a teacher at a reputable primary school in the city. On her first day, she walked into her classroom filled with bright, curious faces. She stood by the chalkboard, her heart full. "Good morning, class," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "My name is Miss Grace Ease, and I believe each one of you can become anything you dream of." The children smiled, their eyes lighting up. From that day forward, she poured her heart into her work, shaping young minds and inspiring confidence in those who felt unseen. Her story spread beyond the school. Newspapers wrote about the nanny who became a graduate, and parents admired her humility and passion. Grace became not just a teacher, but a symbol of hope, proof that circumstances don't define destiny. One afternoon, nearly a year later, Caleb visited her classroom with Jack, now taller and more confident. They stood by the doorway, watching Grace as she helped her pupils draw colorful charts of the solar system. Jack grinned. "Dad, that's the same project she helped me with when I was little." Caleb chuckled softly. "Yes, son, and look at her now. She's teaching others to reach for the stars." When Grace noticed them, she excused herself from the students and walked over, smiling. "Mr. Bennett, Jack, what a surprise." Caleb looked around the cheerful classroom, the drawings, the laughter, the energy, and then back at her. "I had to see you in your element. You've built something beautiful here, Grace." She blushed slightly. "It's more than I ever dreamed possible." Caleb nodded. "You've earned every bit of it. You didn't just change your life, you changed ours. Pan too." Jack handed her a small wrapped gift. Inside was a framed photo of the three of them from her graduation day, with a note that read. Her eyes glistened as she held the frame close. "Thank you, Jack. You'll always be my first student." Years later, Grace's name became known in education circles for her community work. She established a small scholarship program to support young women who wanted to go to school but couldn't afford it, just as she once couldn't. She often said in her speeches, "Every person deserves a chance, not just the rich, not just the lucky. Sometimes all someone needs is one person to believe in them." Caleb attended the first scholarship award ceremony, sitting quietly in the audience, his heart full of pride. As Grace spoke on stage, poised and confident, he thought about how far she had come, from the shy nanny in his household to an educated, accomplished woman changing lives. He smiled and whispered to himself, "You did it, Grace. You really did." And somewhere deep in her heart, Grace knew this was only the beginning.